June 23, 1942. Wehrmacht Field Hospital, 17 kilometers west of Sevastopol. Oberst Heinrich Müller sat across from 3 German prisoners recently exchanged in a medical swap, each man recovering from wounds sustained during the brutal Crimean siege. The hospital's canvas walls did little to muffle the distant artillery, but Müller's attention focused entirely on the soldiers' debriefing reports. Specifically, the section where all 3 independently claimed they'd been shot by the same Soviet sniper, a woman. "Gentlemen, I need clarification," Müller began, tapping the papers. "You're telling me that a single female rifleman is responsible for the casualties in your entire sector?" The first soldier, Gefreiter Klaus Reinhardt, nodded emphatically despite his bandaged shoulder. "With respect, Herr Oberst, that's Bolshevik propaganda nonsense. Some peasant girl who got lucky with a few shots, and now Moscow parades her around for morale." The second prisoner laughed, wincing at the pain it caused his chest wound. "The Reds are desperate. They put women in factories, women driving trucks, now women with rifles. It's pathetic. Any properly trained German marksman would eliminate such a target in an hour." Müller poured schnapps for the men, raising his glass. "To German superiority, and to the swift conclusion of this charade when our real soldiers encounter these Soviet fantasies." The laughter echoed through the hospital tent, confident and dismissive. What Oberst Müller didn't know was that the woman those soldiers described wasn't propaganda. Lyudmila Pavlichenko was, at that precise moment, concealed in the rubble of a destroyed apartment building 300 meters from German lines, preparing for what would become her 247th confirmed kill on the long road to 309. The 25-year-old from Bila Tserkva had already eliminated an entire German reconnaissance platoon the previous week, 7 men in 90 minutes, each shot placed with surgical precision through gaps in their body armor. She'd survived a mortar strike that left shrapnel embedded in her left leg, continued operations through blood loss that would have incapacitated most men, and personally recovered intelligence documents from a German officer she'd killed at 400 meters in crosswind conditions. Within 48 hours of Müller's dismissive toast, a German patrol would discover a forward observation post where 5 soldiers lay dead, each killed by a single shot to the head or throat, their binoculars and range-finding equipment still in position. The Soviet sniper's calling card. German infantry doctrine, perfected through campaigns in Poland, France, and the early months of Operation Barbarossa, established clear superiority through combined arms integration and technological advantage. Every tactical manual emphasized the primacy of the MG-42 machine gun as the foundation of defensive positions. Its 1,200 rounds per minute rate, creating interlocking fields of fire that made Soviet infantry assaults suicidal. German marksmanship training, mandatory for all Wehrmacht soldiers, required competency at 300 meters with standard-issue Karabiner 98K rifles equipped with iron sights. Dedicated German snipers, selected from men who demonstrated exceptional shooting ability, received Zeiss ZF-41 or ZF-42 optical sights manufactured to tolerances measured in hundredths of millimeters, produced in factories where precision instrument making dated back centuries. The doctrine assumed Soviet forces, lacking Germany's industrial sophistication and training rigor, would field inferior equipment operated by inadequately prepared soldiers. This assumption carried through to assessments of Soviet women in combat roles, dismissed as either fabricated propaganda or desperation measures indicating the Red Army's collapse. German intelligence estimated that any female Soviet combatants would be relegated to auxiliary roles, medical support, or at most, local militia defense where losses were acceptable because the personnel were expendable. The idea that a woman could outshoot trained German marksmen seemed to violate natural order itself. While German officers refined these doctrines in comfortable headquarters, Lyudmila Pavlichenko was systematically dismantling them in Odessa's ruins. September 8, 1941, her first day of combat operations. Two Romanian officers, allies of Germany, coordinating an assault from a damaged hotel balcony 420 meters from her position. Pavlichenko's Mosin Nagant, 1891-30, a rifle designed before her parents were born, had a PU-4X scope salvaged from a weapon whose previous owner hadn't survived his first week. She'd spent 6 hours motionless in a collapsed bakery, ignoring hunger, thirst, and the rats that investigated her boots. When both officers stepped into the open simultaneously, she made a decision that violated German doctrine's emphasis on patience and perfect shot selection. 2 shots, 3 seconds apart. Both targets eliminated. She reported back to her unit commander that evening, voice steady despite the adrenaline still flooding her system. 2 confirmed, requesting additional ammunition. This was kill number 1 and 2 of what would eventually become 309, each one meticulously recorded in her personal log, each one representing a German or Romanian soldier who'd underestimated the woman behind the rifle. The Soviet approach to sniper warfare violated every principle German doctrine established regarding proper military organization, equipment standards, and personnel selection. Where Germans produced precision optical instruments in climate-controlled factories with trained technicians, Soviet scopes were assembled in hastily evacuated workshops by workers who'd been making farming equipment months earlier. Quality control was brutal in its simplicity. Scopes that couldn't maintain 0 through 100 rounds were scrapped. Those that survived were issued. The Mosin Nagant rifle Pavlichenko carried weighed 4 kilograms, featured a bolt-action mechanism requiring manual cycling after each shot, and had been designed in 1891 when cavalry charges were still legitimate tactics. Its 7.62 .54 mm cartridge produced violent recoil that left bruises across the shooter's shoulder after extended firing sessions, particularly for women whose smaller frames absorbed more impact. The rifle's length, 122 centimeters, made it nearly impossible to maneuver in confined spaces, a severe disadvantage in urban warfare. Soviet snipers received no specialized cold weather gear, no backup weapons, no radios for communication. They operated alone or in pairs, often separated from their units for days, living in rubble piles and destroyed buildings, eating whatever they'd carried or could scavenge. If wounded, evacuation was uncertain. If captured, German treatment of Soviet female soldiers was unspeakable. The mortality rate for Soviet snipers in the first year of the war exceeded 60%. Yet they continued hunting. What German analysts saw as catastrophic deficiencies, Lyudmila Pavlichenko transformed into asymmetric advantages through adaptation German doctrine couldn't comprehend. October 17, 1941, Odessa perimeter defense. German infantry had established a forward command post in a reinforced cellar, believing the position's depth and concrete construction made it invulnerable to artillery. Pavlichenko spent 2 days studying their patterns, noting that junior officers emerged every 4 hours for situation reports, always using the same exit point, always standing in the same position while consulting maps. On the 3rd day, she positioned herself in a destroyed tramcar 600 meters distant, an angle German defensive planning hadn't considered because it seemed impossible for accurate rifle fire. When the next officer emerged, she compensated for wind, distance, and the target's brief exposure time. 1 shot. The officer collapsed. 15 minutes later, another officer came to investigate. 1 shot. This pattern continued for 6 hours. 7 German officers eliminated before they understood they were being hunted from a direction their doctrine said was outside effective rifle range. Pavlichenko's Mosin Nagant had received 32 bullet impacts during the engagement, rounds that punctured the tram's metal walls around her position. The rifle itself had 2 fresh dents in the stock, and a scratch across the scope, housing where a bullet had come within centimeters of her eye. In a German precision instrument, such damage would render the weapon inoperable, requiring factory service. Pavlichenko wiped the scope lens, confirmed Zero hadn't shifted, and continued operations. German rifles are elegant, she told a war correspondent weeks later, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who'd survived what shouldn't be survivable. Beautiful metalwork, perfect machining. But elegance means nothing when you're dead. They build rifles to impress officers. We build tactics to kill Germans. An official Wehrmacht intelligence assessment dated November 30th, 1941, classified Nur für den Dienstgebrauch, concluded the following regarding Soviet female combatants. Reports of individual female snipers operating in the Odessa and Sevastopol sectors indicate a propaganda effort designed to mask the severity of Soviet personnel shortages. The Bolshevik regime's willingness to deploy women in direct combat roles demonstrates the desperation of a military apparatus facing imminent collapse. While isolated instances of competent female shooters may occur, these represent statistical anomalies rather than systematic threats. Physiological factors inherent to female biology preclude sustained effectiveness in high-stress combat environments. Women possess lower average upper body strength, reduced spatial reasoning capabilities as measured by German psychological research, and emotional volatility incompatible with the psychological demands of infantry combat. Soviet claims of female snipers achieving double-digit kill counts should be dismissed as fabrications intended to boost domestic morale while demoralizing German forces through unconventional psychological warfare. The tactical reality remains unchanged. Properly trained German infantry, supported by established doctrine and superior equipment, maintains decisive advantages over any Soviet forces regardless of gender composition. Recommend monitoring these reports for propaganda analysis purposes, but advise against dedicating operational resources to counter-sniper operations, targeting specifically female combatants. Such efforts would validate Soviet propaganda by suggesting these individuals represent legitimate threats. Current assessment: female Soviet snipers will prove operationally insignificant within 2 to 3 months as combat stress exceeds their physiological and psychological tolerances. No doctrinal modifications required. No! While German High Command drafted dismissals, Lyudmila Pavlichenko was systematically destroying German command infrastructure throughout Sevastopol's defensive perimeter. December 14, 1941. Target: German artillery forward observer, directing fire against Soviet positions from a church bell tower, 400 meters behind enemy lines. Pavlichenko had identified the observer 3 days earlier, noted his schedule, his preferred observation position, the 12 seconds of exposure when he leaned out to verify coordinates. She'd also noted the protection detail: 4 guards rotating every 6 hours, a machine gun position covering the church approach, sandbags reinforcing the tower opening. German doctrine called such positions effectively invulnerable to individual snipers, requiring either artillery strike or infantry assault to eliminate. Pavlichenko disagreed. She waited until the guard rotation, the 17-minute window, when soldiers were distracted by transfer rituals and status reports. 1 shot, forward observer eliminated. Before the body finished falling, she'd shifted position 40 meters to a pre-selected backup location. Understanding German counter-sniper doctrine demanded immediate suppressive fire on suspected shooter positions. Machine gun fire tore through her initial position 30 seconds later, exactly as she'd anticipated. By this point, she had conducted over 150 confirmed kills, well past the halfway mark toward the 309 that would eventually make her the most successful female sniper in military history. German artillery logs recorded unexplainable losses of forward observers and communication personnel, casualties that contradicted the assessment, claiming female snipers posed no one operational threat. 7 artillery forward observers dead in 3 weeks, each eliminated by precise long-range fire, each position subsequently abandoned by German forces who understood they were being hunted by something their doctrine hadn't prepared them for. The Germans had made a fatal calculation error, one rooted in assumptions about gender, capability, and the nature of sniper warfare itself. Their logic appeared unassailable. German male soldiers, benefiting from superior training, better equipment, and stronger physiological attributes, should dominate any engagement with Soviet female combatants. German snipers received months of specialized instruction. Soviet women received weeks. German optical equipment was manufactured to precision standards. Soviet scopes were mass-produced under evacuation conditions. German doctrine emphasized patience, proper positioning, and perfect shots. The mathematics seemed to guarantee German victory. What they critically overlooked was that sniper warfare isn't mathematics. It's psychology, patience, and the willingness to endure conditions your opponent cannot imagine surviving. Pavlichenko operated in environments that would break most men. She remained motionless for 8, 10, sometimes 14 hours, controlling her breathing, ignoring thirst and hunger, mentally calculating windage and distance adjustments while her muscles screamed for movement. She'd survived situations where German snipers would have withdrawn. February 2nd, 1942, Sevastopol outskirts. German counter-sniper team, 2 expert marksmen supported by a spotter with high-powered optics, had identified Pavlichenko's general area after she'd eliminated 3 soldiers in one morning. They established overwatch positions, waited for her to reveal herself with another shot. Standard German doctrine: patience wins sniper duels. Pavlichenko understood their tactics because she'd studied German sniper manual sections captured from dead officers. She did something German doctrine said was suicide. She deliberately drew fire, exposed her helmet on a stick, watched where the shots came from, triangulated positions. Then she waited. Not hours, days. The German team, confident in their superiority, eventually relaxed their vigilance. When the spotter stood to stretch, Pavlichenko fired once. Kill. The 2 snipers panicked, fired blind suppression, revealed their exact positions. 2 more shots, 3 dead Germans. One patient woman who'd survived by understanding that German doctrine's strength was simultaneously its weakness. It was predictable. Understanding this psychological dimension made Lyudmila Pavlichenko untouchable throughout operations that should have killed her dozens of times. March 15, 1942, during intense German assault on Soviet positions. Enemy infantry advanced under artillery cover, a tactic designed to suppress defenders and create chaos. Pavlichenko, positioned in rubble that offered minimal protection, was hit by mortar fragments that embedded shrapnel in her left leg and lower back. German doctrine said, wounded soldiers evacuate immediately, or risk death from blood loss, shock, infection. Pavlichenko stuffed fabric torn from her uniform into the wounds, bit down on a leather strap and continued engaging targets. 4 more confirmed kills that day, each shot placed while she fought waves of pain that would have incapacitated soldiers who'd never learned to separate physical sensation from operational necessity. When she finally allowed evacuation 6 hours later, medical personnel found she'd lost enough blood that another 30 minutes would have meant death. She was back in position within 2 weeks, walking with a limp that never fully healed, carrying scars that would remind her for the rest of her life that German bullets had tried and failed to stop her. This tactic, this absolute refusal to yield regardless of physical damage, repeated across her 309 confirmed kills, proved that German assessments of female psychological tolerance were fantasies constructed by men who'd never tested their own limits against someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. German intelligence calculated training quality, equipment precision, physiological advantages, tactical doctrine superiority. They calculated everything except one variable. You cannot defeat an opponent who refuses to surrender, who turns your own doctrine against you, who survives conditions you didn't believe humans could endure. And Lyudmila Pavlichenko survived through 309 kills because she understood something German doctrine never acknowledged. Wars aren't won by the soldiers with the best equipment. They're won by the soldiers, still standing when the fighting stops. The psychological dimension that had already frustrated German counter-sniper teams attempting to eliminate Pavlichenko was only the first of three advantages Soviet female snipers possessed. Advantages German doctrine had never anticipated, because they'd never considered women capable of sustained combat operations. German training emphasized superior marksmanship, better equipment, and aggressive positioning to dominate engagement zones. These principles worked effectively against male Soviet snipers who operated according to patterns German instructors had studied and countered. But Pavlichenko and her female counterparts introduced variables German doctrine couldn't quantify. Infinite patience born from understanding they had nowhere to retreat to, physical advantages in urban concealment that male bodies couldn't replicate, and psychological warfare that exploited German assumptions about gender and combat capability. April 8, 1942, Sevastopol defensive positions. A German sniper team, Oberjäger Franz Becker and his spotter, had been hunting Pavlichenko for 6 days after she'd eliminated their unit's commanding officer. They'd studied Soviet sniper manuals, prepared counter-ambush positions, waited for her to make the mistake all snipers eventually make, taking one shot too many from the same location. On the 7th day, Becker positioned himself in a reinforced observation post with clear sight lines across 300 meters of rubble, confident his patience would outlast whoever was hunting his men. His spotter scanned methodically with high-powered German optics, watching for movement, muzzle flash, anything indicating a sniper's presence. They maintained this vigil for 11 hours, rotating shifts, remaining alert. Pavlichenko, concealed in a collapsed cellar entrance 40 meters from Becker's position, had been motionless for 14 hours. She'd identified his location on day 3, understood his patterns, knew his shift rotations, and waited. Not for him to expose himself fully, because German snipers were trained better than that. She waited for the moment his mind would betray him, the moment every human experiences after enough hours of perfect vigilance, the micro-relaxation when concentration slips for 3 seconds. When Becker leaned forward slightly to adjust his scope's focus, creating a 7-centimeter gap between his helmet and the sandbag protection, Pavlichenko fired once. Becker died without understanding where the shot originated. His spotter, following German protocol, immediately took cover and called for support. Pavlichenko had already displaced to a position 50 meters away, watching German soldiers flood the area around Becker's post, searching for a sniper who was no longer there. This was kill number 271 of the 309 that would define her legend, a kill achieved through patience. German training had never encountered because they'd never fought opponents who could remain absolutely motionless for durations that exceeded human endurance limits, as German physiology understood them. The second advantage emerged from what German assessment reports had identified as Soviet female snipers' primary weakness: smaller physical stature and reduced strength compared to male soldiers. German intelligence calculated that women's smaller frames, averaging 15 to 20 centimeters shorter and 15 to 25 kilograms lighter than male soldiers, would limit their effectiveness in carrying heavy equipment, maintaining shooting positions, and surviving the physical demands of extended combat operations. This assessment proved catastrophically wrong because it failed to understand that in urban warfare, particularly in Stalingrad and Sevastopol's ruins, smaller meant invisible. Pavlichenko could conceal herself in spaces German male snipers physically couldn't fit into: collapsed ventilation shafts, gaps between rubble piles, destroyed stairwells where building collapses created crawl spaces too narrow for larger bodies. Her shooting positions often existed in locations German counter-snipers never considered checking because they assumed no one could occupy such confined spaces for hours while maintaining shooting capability. May 3, 1942, Soviet defensive perimeter. German assault troops were advancing under artillery cover, and a German sniper had positioned himself in an intact building providing overwatch for the attack. Pavlichenko identified him, understood his tactical advantage, but couldn't achieve a clear shot from conventional positions without exposing herself to his superior angle. She crawled into a destroyed sewer pipe, 30 centimeters in diameter, wiggling through debris and filth until she emerged in a position directly beneath the building where the German sniper operated. The pipe's opening, obscured by rubble, created a shooting portal the size of a dinner plate. She braced her Mosin Nagant against the pipe's interior, controlled her breathing in the confined space where her exhaled breath created visible condensation, calculated the extreme upward angle required to hit a target in a third-floor window, and fired. The German sniper never saw where death came from, because German doctrine said no sniper could operate from such a position. The confined space's recoil nearly dislocated Pavlichenko's shoulder. The muzzle blast in the enclosed pipe temporarily deafened her left ear, and extracting herself from the sewer took 40 minutes of painful crawling. But the German advance faltered without their Overwatch sniper, Soviet positions held, and Pavlichenko had demonstrated that physical size was an advantage, not a liability, when the battlefield itself became your concealment. But the third advantage proved most devastating to German morale, and most difficult for German officers to counter through tactical adjustments or equipment improvements. Soviet female snipers fought with a desperation and motivation that had no equivalent in German forces. German soldiers were fighting for territorial conquest, ideological supremacy, or following orders. Pavlichenko fought because German forces were occupying her country, killing her people, and had made clear through their treatment of Soviet civilians, and particularly Soviet women, what fate awaited those who surrendered. This wasn't abstract nationalism or propaganda-driven motivation. This was existential combat, where capture meant torture and death, where defeat meant her family faced German occupation, where every German soldier she eliminated represented one less threat to everything she valued. German psychological warfare analysts had studied captured Soviet propaganda, interviewed prisoners, analyzed Soviet morale, and concluded that female soldiers would break psychologically under sustained combat stress. They calculated wrong because they measured Soviet women against German soldiers' motivations, never understanding that when you're fighting for survival itself, endurance limits expand beyond what peacetime psychology can predict. June 16, 1942, during intense German bombardment preceding a major assault. Pavlichenko had been operating continuously for 9 days, averaging 4 hours of sleep per night, eating sporadically, drinking contaminated water because supply lines were disrupted. Her body was approaching physiological limits. Tremors in her hands from exhaustion, double vision from dehydration, infections in wounds that hadn't healed properly. German doctrine said soldiers in such condition should be evacuated, deemed combat ineffective. Pavlichenko that day eliminated 6 German soldiers, including a major coordinating artillery strikes, because German forces advancing meant Soviet defensive lines collapsing, which meant the evacuation ships at Sevastopol's harbor would leave without her unit, which meant death. She operated in a state German military medicine said was impossible. Beyond exhaustion, beyond pain threshold, sustained purely by understanding that stopping meant dying. When Soviet forces finally evacuated her from Sevastopol 2 weeks later, she'd added 31 more confirmed kills to her count, bringing her total past 300, each one achieved while her body screamed for rest her mind refused to grant. A German medical officer examining captured Soviet equipment later found her rifle noted the extensive personal modifications she'd made to the stock to accommodate her smaller frame and preferred shooting positions, observed the wear patterns indicating thousands of rounds fired, and concluded in his report that the weapon had been used beyond any reasonable operational lifespan. He didn't understand that Soviet female snipers weren't operating equipment according to German standards. They were surviving. German technical superiority in sniper warfare on paper meant nothing against operational reality that contradicted every specification advantage Wehrmacht possessed. The standard German sniper configuration represented decades of precision engineering and military evolution. Carabiner 98K rifle, manufactured by Mauser with tolerances measured in hundredths of millimeters, equipped with either Zeiss ZF41-1 5x scope or ZF42 4x scope, produced by companies whose optical expertise dated to the 19th century. The rifle itself weighed 3.9 kilograms, featured a 5-round internal magazine, fired 7.92 57mm Mauser ammunition, capable of 1 minute of angle accuracy at 600 meters under ideal conditions. German snipers received 12 to 16 weeks of specialized training at dedicated schools, where instructors had accumulated years of combat experience. They learned range estimation using Zeiss range-finding equipment, windage calculation through mathematical formulas, ballistic compensation for temperature and altitude variables. Support infrastructure included dedicated spotters with high-powered optics, radio communication for coordination, regular equipment maintenance by trained armorers, consistent ammunition supply from German industrial capacity. Average German snipers' operational effectiveness: 40 to 70 kills over career spanning 6 to 12 months before rotation, loss, or reassignment. Cost per German sniper including equipment, training, and support: approximately 8,000 Reichsmarks. Survival rate: 65%. Contrast with Soviet female sniper reality that German assessments had dismissed as desperate improvisation. Pavlichenko's Mosin Nagant, 1891-30, a rifle older than both world wars, weighed 4 kilograms, featured a 5-round internal magazine, fired Dokwanis 7.62x 54mm ammunition with acceptable but not exceptional accuracy. Her PE-4X scope had been salvaged from another sniper's damaged weapon, mounted with whatever tools were available, zeroed through trial and error rather than optical bench testing. She received 3 weeks of training under combat conditions, where instructors were snipers who'd survived long enough to teach, learning through practical application rather than classroom theory. No spotter, no radio communication, no dedicated support infrastructure. Equipment maintenance was personal responsibility. She cleaned her rifle with whatever materials were available, performed repairs using tools scavenged from battlefield debris, hoarded ammunition because resupply was irregular. Her operational effectiveness by early June 1942: over 300 confirmed kills over 9 months of continuous combat operations. Cost per Soviet female sniper, including equipment and minimal training: approximately 600 rubles, equivalent to $200. Survival rate among 588th Regiment and comparable female sniper units: 73%. These statistics were embodied in Pavlichenko's operational record in ways that made German technical advantages irrelevant through sheer operational tempo and target selection efficiency. While German snipers averaged 2 to 4 confirmed kills per week when actively deployed, Pavlichenko, during peak operational periods in Odessa and Sevastopol, achieved 15 to 20 confirmed kills weekly. Her 309 kills weren't distributed evenly across her service. Concentrated bursts during defensive operations where German forces provided target-rich environments, and she operated with the intensity of someone understanding that every German eliminated today meant potentially preventing breakthrough tomorrow. May 1942, her most lethal month. 42 confirmed kills in 28 days, average of 1, 5 per day, including days when weather or tactical situations prevented operations. Compare this to most accomplished German sniper of Eastern Front, Matthias Hetzenauer, whose 345 confirmed kills accumulated over 3 years. Pavlichenko achieved comparable totals in 9 months before being evacuated due to injuries. Her operational intensity reflected the fundamental difference between German snipers operating as specialized assets, supporting conventional operations, versus Soviet female snipers operating as desperate last defense personnel, where every kill directly impacted immediate survival. German snipers could withdraw, rotate, request support. Pavlichenko withdrew when forced by enemy advance, rotated never, and requested only ammunition because that was all Soviet logistics could provide. Wehrmacht logistics officers were recording a disturbing pattern in casualty reports that contradicted assumptions about female snipers' operational insignificance. German expenditure attempting to eliminate or counter Soviet sniper threats, particularly identified female snipers including Pavlichenko, represented resource allocation that violated cost-benefit principles German military efficiency prized. Counter-sniper operations against Pavlichenko specifically consumed approximately 40,000 rounds of rifle and machine gun ammunition, fired at suspected positions, 200 artillery shells targeting known or suspected sniper nests, 15 dedicated counter-sniper teams deployed over 8-month period, estimated 300 man-hours of intelligence analysis attempting to pattern her operations. Total estimated cost, 75,000 Reichsmarks attempting to kill one Soviet woman with a rifle that cost $200. Meanwhile, Pavlichenko's 309 confirmed kills included 36 officers ranging from lieutenants to one colonel, eliminating leadership that represented hundreds of thousands of Reichsmarks in training investment and creating command disruption requiring weeks to restore. Her elimination of artillery observers, forward controllers, and communication personnel disrupted German tactical coordination in ways that multiplied beyond individual kills. A single artillery observer's death meant hours of degraded fire support, potentially saving dozens of Soviet lives and preserving defensive positions. German staff officers, calculating exchange ratios, understood they were losing this asymmetric equation badly. Substantial resources invested in counter-sniper operations, achieving minimal results, while the sniper they hunted continued eliminating high-value personnel and degrading operational effectiveness. Pavlichenko personally represented this asymmetric efficiency in calculations that should have troubled German strategic planning if they'd taken her operational pattern seriously. Conservative estimate of ammunition expended by German forces attempting to kill her across all engagements. Over 100,000 rounds, including rifle, machine gun, and artillery. At average cost of 15 Reichsmarks per round, 1.5 million Reichsmarks spent trying to eliminate one female sniper. Her survival and continued operations demonstrated that German forces were spending more attempting to kill her than the Soviet Union had invested in training, equipping, and supporting her entire 9-month combat career. The 309 German and Romanian soldiers she eliminated represented lost training investment of approximately 3 million Reichsmarks, lost combat effectiveness, irreplaceable in short term, and psychological impact on German forces operating in sectors where Soviet female snipers were active. She represented more confirmed kills than entire squads of German snipers combined, achieved in time frame representing fraction of German sniper career lengths, at cost ratio that favored Soviet investment by factors of hundreds to one. By June 1942, when Soviet command finally evacuated her from Sevastopol due to accumulated wounds and recognition that her propaganda value alive exceeded her tactical value dead, She'd completed combat operations equivalent to what German doctrine considered 3 full combat tours, meaning most German snipers would have been rotated twice before achieving her operational tempo. German High Command was beginning to realize that their dismissive assessment of Soviet female snipers wasn't merely wrong, it was catastrophically wrong in ways that violated fundamental assumptions about gender, capability, and military effectiveness. And Lyudmila Pavlichenko, wounded but alive. Her 309 notches representing 309 German families who would receive death notifications had demonstrated that wooden rifles in determined hands killed just as effectively as precision instruments in confident ones. As German High Command grappled with mounting casualties from Soviet sniper operations, frontline intelligence was about to deliver a revelation that would challenge every assumption Wehrmacht officers held about female combatants and the nature of Eastern Front warfare. July 12, 1942, Soviet evacuation from Sevastopol. German forces overrunning abandoned Soviet positions discovered documents left behind during the chaotic withdrawal. Personnel records, awards, citations, operational reports. Among these papers, a German intelligence officer found a file marked Lieutenant Lyudmila Pavlichenko, 25th Chapayev Division. The file contained her service record, noting deployment to Odessa in August 1941, transfer to Sevastopol in December 1941, and a notation that made the intelligence officer read twice to confirm he understood correctly. Confirmed eliminations, 309 enemy personnel. The officer's initial assumption, typographical error, perhaps 30 or 39 kills. But cross-referencing with other captured documents revealed consistent patterns. Multiple after-action reports mentioned Lieutenant Pavlichenko, eliminating German officers, destroying observation posts, suppressing enemy positions. Awards, citations, detailed specific engagements. 7 German soldiers eliminated in 90 minutes near Odessa. German reconnaissance platoon destroyed. Artillery observers neutralized systematically. The intelligence officer compiled these findings into a report marked urgent, noting that if accurate, this single female Soviet sniper had achieved kill counts exceeding most German sniper careers by factors of 4 or 5. The report reached battalion intelligence within hours, divisional intelligence by evening, and Wehrmacht Eastern Front headquarters within 2 days. Each command level responded with identical initial reaction. Impossible. Propaganda fabrication. Enemy disinformation. But verification came from unexpected sources. German medical personnel conducting prisoner exchanges reported wounded German soldiers independently mentioning a female Soviet sniper operating in Sevastopol sectors. 3 separate soldiers from different units, wounded weeks apart, described similar accounts. Unseen shooter, precision fire, rumored to be woman based on Soviet troop conversations overheard. Wehrmacht intelligence cross-referenced these testimonies with casualty patterns in sectors where Pavlichenko's unit operated. Statistical analysis revealed anomalies, disproportionate officer casualties, systematic elimination of artillery observers and communication personnel, kill patterns consistent with the expert marksman targeting high-value personnel rather than random engagement. By late July 1942, Wehrmacht intelligence concluded the reports were accurate. Soviet forces had deployed female snipers. At least one had achieved over 300 confirmed kills, and German forces had been systematically hunted by opponents they dismissed as propaganda fantasies. The revelation created psychological crisis within Wehrmacht command structure that transcended tactical concerns and struck at ideological foundations of Nazi military doctrine. German military culture, rooted in Prussian traditions emphasizing masculine warrior virtues and National Socialist ideology explicitly defining women's roles as domestic and maternal, couldn't reconcile operational reality with doctrinal assumptions. Elite German snipers, products of months of specialized training and representing peak military professionalism, were being outperformed by Soviet women using equipment German doctrine considered obsolete. The implications were devastating. If German assessments about female combat capability were this catastrophically wrong, what else had German intelligence misunderstood about Soviet military capacity? Luftwaffe pilots could rationalize being frustrated by POWs through physics and engineering limitations. German infantrymen facing female snipers had no such comfort. This was rifle against rifle, human against human, and German men were losing. Officers who'd spent careers confident in German martial superiority now confronted evidence that gender was operationally irrelevant, that determination and skill mattered more than ideology, and that Soviet willingness to deploy every available resource, regardless of Nazi assumptions about proper gender roles, gave Red Army asymmetric advantages Wehrmacht doctrine couldn't counter. Specific reactions revealed the depth of this psychological impact. Luftwaffe suppressed information about female pilots to prevent morale damage. Wehrmacht took opposite approach with female snipers. Some commands circulated intelligence reports widely, believing frontline soldiers needed warning that Soviet snipers included women who should be treated as deadly threats equal to male snipers. Other commands issued contradictory guidance. Operational Order 5193, dated August 3, 1942, stated, "Recent intelligence confirms Soviet deployment of female personnel in sniper roles. All units will maintain tactical vigilance regardless of enemy combatant gender. References in operational reports shall employ standard military terminology without emphasis on gender, as such emphasis serves enemy propaganda purposes by suggesting German forces consider this operationally significant." The order revealed German command's contradictory impulses. Acknowledge threat while minimizing its psychological impact. Warn soldiers while preventing panic. Accept reality while maintaining ideological certainty about German superiority. Frontline reactions varied dramatically. Some German soldiers refused to believe reports, insisting captured documents were propaganda. Others, particularly those who'd survived sniper encounters in sectors where female snipers operated, needed no convincing. These soldiers had learned through experience that whoever was behind the rifle that killed their comrades deserved respect, regardless of gender. A German lieutenant wrote in a letter intercepted by Soviet intelligence, "The Ivans have women shooting at us now. This should be humiliating, but I cannot afford humiliation. I can only afford survival." While German command struggled with the revelation, Lyudmila Pavlichenko had already been evacuated from Sevastopol on one of the last ships before the city fell, her 309 confirmed kills complete. Her combat career effectively ended by accumulated wounds and Soviet recognition that her propaganda value alive exceeded any tactical contribution she could provide dead. But during the period Germans were discovering her records and grappling with implications, she'd continued operations without awareness that her name was circulating through Wehrmacht intelligence channels. June 1942, her final weeks in Sevastopol. Mission count: 309, each one representing a German or Romanian soldier who'd underestimated Soviet determination or been unlucky enough to expose himself within her range. Her perspective on being discovered existed only in retrospect. Interviewed years later, she expressed indifference to German reactions. "We didn't fight for recognition from our enemies. We fought because our country was invaded. Our people were dying. And every fascist we eliminated meant one fewer threat to Soviet survival. Whether they knew we were women, whether they cared, whether they were humiliated by it, none of that mattered. What mattered was that they died, and we survived long enough to kill more of them." The discovery changed nothing operationally for her, because she'd already been evacuated. But for Germans still fighting on the Eastern Front, the knowledge that women like Pavlichenko existed and operated with lethal effectiveness added psychological dimension to warfare that German doctrine had never anticipated. Soviet female snipers weren't anomalies. They were systematic deployment of capable personnel German ideology said shouldn't exist. And they were winning. After the war, Soviet and Allied interrogators collected testimonies from German prisoners of war, conducting systematic interviews to document Eastern Front experiences and compile intelligence on Wehrmacht operations, tactics, and perspectives. When interrogators asked about Soviet sniper operations, unexpected consistency emerged in German responses. Even officers from elite units who maintained ideological commitment to National Socialism showed visible discomfort when discussing Soviet female combatants. Pattern emerged across hundreds of interviews. Initial dismissal of Soviet capability, followed by grudging acknowledgement that Red Army had proven far more formidable than German intelligence predicted, and specific mention of female snipers as psychological factor that undermined German soldiers' confidence in their own superiority. Interrogators noted that German prisoners generally maintained professional demeanor, discussing combat experiences, but references to being hunted by female snipers produced defensive reactions, rationalizations, or angry denials that suggested deep psychological impact beyond tactical concerns. Obergefreiter Klaus Richter, 24th Panzer Division, captured near Stalingrad in February 1943, testified, "Our unit operated in sectors where Soviet snipers were active throughout 1942. We lost officers, radio operators, anyone who exposed themselves for more than seconds. Standard counter-sniper tactics proved ineffective. These shooters were patient beyond anything our doctrine prepared us for. After Sevastopol fell, we captured documents indicating some snipers were women, specifically records mentioning a Lieutenant Pavlichenko with over 300 kills. I remember my commander's reaction. He refused to believe it, called it propaganda, said no woman could achieve such numbers. But the documents were consistent. Multiple sources verified it. Whether our casualties specifically included her kills, I cannot say. But knowing that women had been hunting us, that possibility existed that some of my dead comrades were killed by female snipers. This created dissonance. We were told sleeves were inferior, that women belonged in supportive roles. Operational reality contradicted these assurances. It made us question what else we'd been told that was wrong. Hauptmann Werner Steiner, counter-sniper specialist attached to 6th Army, provided more technical testimony. I was tasked with eliminating Soviet sniper threats in the Sevastopol sector, April through June 1942. Soviet snipers there demonstrated exceptional skill. Long-range precision, excellent fieldcraft, tactical patience. We attempted standard counter-sniper operations, observation, triangulation, coordinated fire. Success rate was perhaps 20%, far below expectations. After evacuation, intelligence briefed us that several snipers in that sector were female, including one with 309 confirmed kills. My initial reaction was disbelief. 300 kills represents extraordinary achievement for any sniper regardless of gender. But documentation was compelling. What troubled me most? This meant female Soviet soldiers had outperformed German specialists. Not through superior equipment, their rifles were adequate but not exceptional. Not through better training. Our training was more comprehensive. Through sheer determination and operational intensity, we couldn't match. They operated in conditions that should have been unendurable. They survived casualties that should have broken unit cohesion, and they killed us effectively while we failed to kill them. Gender became irrelevant metric. The relevant metric was lethality, and they exceeded us. Lieutenant Hans Vogel, infantry officer whose unit operated near Odessa in late 1941, recalled, "We began encountering systematic sniper harassment in September 1941. Officers being eliminated, forward observers killed, communication disrupted. At first, we attributed this to normal Soviet defensive operations. But patterns emerged: precision fire, high-value target selection, operational persistence across weeks. One of my lieutenants was killed at 400 meters in crosswind conditions, shot requiring exceptional skill. We never identified the shooter. After the war, researching Soviet records, I learned a female sniper operated in that sector during that period, Lieutenant Pavlichenko. Whether she killed my lieutenant specifically, records don't indicate. But the possibility exists. 309 confirmed kills over 9 months means she was eliminating German soldiers daily during peak operations. Some of those were certainly from my division, possibly my regiment, conceivably men I knew personally. Learning this years later provided uncomfortable context. We'd been hunted by someone German doctrine said couldn't be effective combatant, and she'd proven more lethal than most German snipers. Common themes synthesized across testimonies revealed consistent psychological impact. German soldiers mentioning female Soviet combatants expressed shock, sometimes anger, occasionally respect, but universally acknowledged that gender had proven operationally irrelevant. Several attempted rationalization, suggesting Soviet female combatants were exceptions or that German intelligence had exaggerated their numbers. Others admitted frankly that Nazi ideology about gender roles had been propaganda contradicted by battlefield reality. Almost all referenced specific incidents where Soviet resistance exceeded German expectations, with female combatants mentioned as emblematic of Soviet willingness to deploy every possible resource for national survival. Interrogators noted that references to Pavlichenko specifically carried particular weight. Her 309 confirmed kills represented undeniable documentation that at least one female Soviet sniper had achieved numbers exceeding all but the most accomplished German snipers, and German prisoners couldn't dismiss this as propaganda when their own casualty records confirmed Soviet claims. Some testimonies referenced Pavlichenko without knowing her name, describing instead the legend that had spread among German forces. Feldwebel Anton Becker, captured in late 1943, testified. There were stories among frontline soldiers about a Soviet female sniper called Lady Death or similar variants, supposedly responsible for hundreds of German casualties, supposedly impossible to kill because she'd survived multiple counter-sniper operations. Command discouraged such talk as defeatist superstition, but the stories persisted because soldiers believed them. Whether the specific woman existed or was composite of multiple snipers, the psychological effect was real. We feared being targeted by someone we couldn't see, couldn't catch, and according to rumor, couldn't kill. After surrender, I learned the stories were based on an actual person, Lieutenant Pavlichenko. Her 309 kills, including the operations in Odessa and Sevastopol, where my division operated, made her one of the most effective individual combatants on the Eastern Front. That such effectiveness came from a 25-year-old woman forced reconsideration of every assumption we'd been fed about Soviet inferiority and proper gender roles. She hadn't just killed us. She'd killed our certainty. The testimonies confirmed what Germans had discovered too late. Soviet female snipers weren't propaganda fabrications or isolated anomalies. They were systematic deployment of capable personnel who'd proven more lethal than German doctrine could accommodate. And Lyudmila Pavlichenko, with her 309 confirmed kills, documented not just in Soviet records, but verified through German casualty reports and prisoner testimonies, was among the deadliest snipers in military history, regardless of gender, nationality, or ideology. When the war in Europe ended on May 9, 1945, Lyudmila Pavlichenko's final record stood as testament to what Germans had dismissed as impossible. 309 confirmed kills, each one meticulously documented through witness verification, recovered identification papers, or observation by commanding officers. This number wasn't propaganda inflation or estimation. Soviet military doctrine required two independent confirmations for each sniper kill to be officially recorded, meaning Pavlichenko's actual eliminations likely exceeded 400 when accounting for unverified engagements. Her operational period spanned just 9 months of active combat, from August 1941 deployment to Odessa through June 1942. Evacuation from Sevastopol, representing kill rate of approximately 34 German and Romanian soldiers per month, more than one per day during periods of intense combat. She'd survived mortar strikes, artillery bombardments, multiple wounds from shrapnel and bullets, infections that should have incapacitated her, and psychological stress that broke soldiers with years more combat experience. She received the Hero of the Soviet Union, the Order of Lenin, and 2 Orders of the Red Banner. The physical toll was permanent, shrapnel embedded in her left leg that would cause pain for the rest of her life, hearing damage from constant artillery exposure, scars across her shoulders and back, frostbite damage to her fingers from winter operations in Sevastopol. But she survived, which itself represented extraordinary achievement, given that female snipers operating in frontline positions faced mortality rates exceeding 60%. To understand the magnitude of these numbers, context matters more than raw statistics. The most accomplished German sniper on the Eastern Front, Matthias Hetzenauer, achieved 345 confirmed kills over 3 years of continuous operations from 1943 to 1945. Pavlichenko achieved 309 in 9 months, operating during the most desperate period of Soviet defense, when German forces were advancing rapidly and Soviet units were being systematically overrun. Soviet male snipers who survived the war typically recorded between 150 and 200 confirmed kills over multi-year careers. Vasily Zaitsev, made famous by later films and books, recorded 242 confirmed kills over the entire war. Pavlichenko exceeded this in her first 9 months before being forced into evacuation. Her kill rate, calculated per month of active operations, was approximately triple that of average Soviet snipers and double that of the most accomplished male marksmen. The difference wasn't equipment or training, both of which she received less of than male counterparts. The difference was operational intensity born from understanding that every day German forces advanced, every supply line they secured, every position they fortified, made Soviet survival less likely. She operated with urgency male snipers, fighting offensive operations never experienced. Her 309 kills represented more than individual casualties. Among the confirmed dead were 36 officers ranging from lieutenants to 1 colonel, eliminating leadership that represented hundreds of thousands of Reichsmarks in training costs and creating command disruption that cascaded through entire battalions. She systematically targeted artillery observers, eliminating at least 23, degrading German fire support effectiveness by forcing them to replace experienced spotters with inexperienced replacements. She killed radio operators, destroying communication infrastructure that required Germans to rely on runners, slowing their operational tempo. She eliminated machine gun crews at critical moments during Soviet counterattacks, enabling advances that would have been suicidal against established positions. The strategic value of her kills exceeded their numerical count because she targeted force multipliers, personnel whose deaths created disproportionate operational impact. German intelligence estimated that her elimination of artillery observers alone prevented between 200 and 300 Soviet casualties through degraded German fire support accuracy. By any metric, Pavlichenko's operational record represented one of the most lethal individual combat performances in military history. And she achieved it with a rifle Germans considered adequate but unremarkable, in conditions Germans believed women couldn't endure. Soviet female snipers, as organized program, validated the controversial decision, to deploy women in direct combat roles that violated both traditional Russian cultural norms and international expectations about women's military participation. Approximately 2,000 Soviet women served as snipers during the Great Patriotic War, collectively achieving over 12,000 confirmed kills, representing roughly 15% of total Soviet sniper eliminations, despite constituting less than 5% of sniper personnel. The mathematics revealed asymmetric effectiveness. Female snipers achieved higher per capita kill rates than male snipers on average, operated with lower resource requirements, and demonstrated survival rates that exceeded male sniper units. The Central Women's Sniper School, established in 1943 after early female snipers like Pavlichenko proved the concept viable, produced over 1,500 graduates who went directly to frontline units. Their combined impact forced German tactical adjustments, diverted counter-sniper resources, and created psychological burden German soldiers expressed consistently in post-war testimonies. Cost-effectiveness analysis revealed the strategic wisdom of this deployment. Total Soviet investment in female sniper program, approximately 3 million rubles, including training facilities, instructors, equipment, and logistics support. Estimated German casualties inflicted. Over 12,000 killed, with corresponding impact on unit cohesion, morale, and operational effectiveness. German expenditure on counter-sniper operations, targeting specifically identified female snipers. Estimated 50 million Reichsmarks across dedicated teams, equipment, and diverted manpower. The cost ratio, approximately 1 ruble spent generating 20 Reichsmarks in German counter-investment, represented nearly perfect asymmetric warfare. Female snipers cost the Soviet Union minimal resources, while forcing Germany to expend disproportionate resources attempting to counter them. But numbers alone don't capture the strategic value of the psychological warfare dimension. German soldiers, knowing that Soviet women were hunting them, that some of the most lethal snipers they faced were female, undermined Nazi ideological certainty about racial and gender superiority. When your doctrine says women can't fight, and reality says women are killing your soldiers more effectively than enemy men, every ideological pillar supporting your worldview becomes suspect. The 588th Regiment and female sniper programs collectively proved that in warfare, determination and innovation matter more than prejudice and assumptions. After the war ended, Lyudmila Pavlichenko faced challenges more difficult than anything she'd encountered in combat. Finding purpose in a world that no longer required her to kill. Soviet High Command evacuated her from Sevastopol in June 1942, recognizing that her propaganda value alive exceeded any tactical contribution she could provide dead. She became the first Soviet woman to visit the United States on official goodwill tour in 1942, meeting Eleanor Roosevelt and speaking at rallies across America to build support for opening Second Front in Europe. American reporters asked her about makeup, dresses, and feminine pursuits. She responded, "Gentlemen, I am 25 years old, and I have killed 309 fascist occupants by now. Don't you think, gentlemen, that you have been hiding behind my back for too long?" The quote became famous, capturing her refusal to perform femininity for Western expectations. Eleanor Roosevelt became personal friend, inviting Pavlichenko to stay at White House, writing about her in newspaper columns, recognizing her as combat veteran rather than curiosity. After returning to Soviet Union, Pavlichenko trained other snipers, completed her university education in history, worked as historian researching Soviet Navy's role in the war, and rarely spoke publicly about her combat experiences. She married twice, had one son, and lived quietly until her death in 1974 at age 58 from stroke. Her body worn down by wounds that never fully healed and stress that never fully dissipated. Soviet Union awarded her extensive recognition during her lifetime. Hero of the Soviet Union, Order of Lenin, 2 Orders of the Red Banner, plus decorations from multiple Soviet republics. After her death, She was memorialized on postage stamps, in museum exhibits, through monuments in her hometown of Bila Tserkva, and in military histories documenting the Great Patriotic War. For decades, the full story of Soviet female combatants remained virtually unknown in the West, dismissed during Cold War tensions as Soviet propaganda exaggeration, or viewed skeptically through lens suggesting communist regimes fabricated female military achievements for ideological purposes. Only after Glasnost in the 1980s did Western historians gain access to Soviet archives, revealing that far from exaggeration, Soviet accounts had understated female combatants' contributions. German military records captured by Allied forces after 1945, prisoner testimonies collected during war crimes trials, and Wehrmacht operational documents all corroborated Soviet claims. Pavlichenko's 309 kills weren't propaganda. They were documented through German casualty records that independently verified Soviet accounts. By the 1990s and 2000s, serious military historians recognized that Soviet deployment of women in combat roles represented largest-scale female military mobilization in history, and that female snipers specifically had achieved combat effectiveness exceeding many male units. Modern recognition includes museums throughout former Soviet Union, featuring Pavlichenko's rifle, uniform, medals, and personal effects. Schools bear her name. Streets in Ukrainian and Russian cities honor her memory. Documentary films, books, and academic studies analyze her tactics, psychology, and historical significance. The Russian Federation continues honoring her as national hero, evidence that her legend transcends political systems and remains a powerful symbol of Soviet resistance during Great Patriotic War. The story of Lyudmila Pavlichenko transcends its historical moment and offers lessons about warfare, human potential, and the danger of underestimation that remain relevant decades after her death. German forces dismissed Soviet female combatants based on ideological assumptions about gender capability, and that dismissal created vulnerability they never adequately corrected. Prejudice created blind spots in German tactical thinking, intelligence analysis, and operational planning. Every assumption about what women could or couldn't do operationally proved wrong. Yet German command structure struggled to adapt, because adaptation required acknowledging that fundamental ideological premises were false. This pattern repeats throughout military history. Forces that underestimate opponents based on prejudice rather than capability assessment consistently suffer strategic failures when reality contradicts their assumptions. Pavlichenko's 309 kills weren't aberrations. They were proof that determination, skill, and motivation matter infinitely more than gender, and that dismissing opponents for any reason except their actual capabilities creates exploitable weaknesses. Her story demonstrates that warfare rewards innovation and adaptation over technological superiority and resource advantages. Germans possessed better optics, superior training facilities, more comprehensive sniper doctrine, and more resources dedicated to counter-sniper operations. They lost the sniper war because Soviet snipers, particularly women like Pavlichenko, who understood they were fighting for survival itself, operated with intensity and persistence German doctrine couldn't match. Sometimes the soldier willing to endure more, sacrifice more, and persist longer defeats the soldier with better equipment. Sometimes simple tools deployed with extraordinary skill exceed sophisticated systems deployed with adequate competence. Pavlichenko's Mosin Nagant, unmodified except for salvaged scope, proved more lethal than German precision rifles because the human behind the weapon refused to quit, regardless of wounds, exhaustion, fear, or odds. The German officer who, in June 1942, dismissed reports of female Soviet snipers as propaganda, never understood what Lyudmila Pavlichenko proved through 309 confirmed kills, achieved in 9 months of operations that should have killed her dozens of times. That courage doesn't require validation from enemies who don't believe you're capable. that skill transcends assumptions about who should possess it, and that wars are won not by those with the best equipment or most confident ideology, but by those who refuse to surrender when defeat seems inevitable. In a rifle older than both world wars, against an enemy that refused to take her seriously until 309 of their soldiers were dead and the woman they dismissed was already gone, Pavlichenko demonstrated that sometimes the most dangerous opponent isn't the one with superior firepower. It's the one your prejudice prevents you from seeing, until the body count forces you to look.